can I do? 'Cause I'm just a sinking ship, and you're just a pair of lips that I've lost in the moment. All I want is for you to come back. Now I'm caught in the middle of life, and I need.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome back to another edition of the Red Pill Diaries. And I have with me my guy, Scott from Kalibrated. How's it going, Scott?
Good. How are you doing today?
Man, I'm doing good. Before we go into anything, man, the show that you did the other day about Ukraine was awesome. Let me see if I can pull it up. It was the one, Difficult Days for the AFU. Scott, man, you killed it on that, man. You killed
Thank
it.
you, man.
I really appreciate that. I want to ask you now, before we go into Ukraine, we see what's going on in Latin America with the United States. Do you believe that Trump will pull the trigger and cause chaos across Latin America? Because we understand that everything that they're doing is failing. So and he can no longer hide behind the so-called peace president now. Do you think that he's going to pull the trigger?
Yeah, this is a great question because we are seeing the buildup around Venezuela. We are seeing the destroyers being moved into the region. We're seeing the aircraft carriers being moved into the region. We're also seeing a number of aircraft performing what look like training operations around Venezuela, flying very close to Venezuelan airspace, potentially entering said airspace. And again, we see the same thing with the Russians. The Russians will do these mock runs of bombing strikes where they're pretending to launch cruise missiles or something from their strategic aircraft. We're seeing that with the U.S. bombers, B-1 bombers off the coast of Venezuela. So there is definitely a sense that something is coming that is very accurate. President Trump himself said he's considering strikes on these corridors, these drug corridors or whatever you want to call them, basically precision strikes on the cartels inside of Venezuela. This is goofy, first and foremost, because you're not going to stop the drug trade by striking anything inside of Venezuela. A lot of drugs come over the Mexican border, so we should probably start there and work our way down if we actually wanted to solve the drug issue. That's not what we're doing. It's very clear that regime change is the goal. And when we talk about, is Trump going to do X? I would just look historically, just look at the last year of his administration. They have bombed Iran. They have bombed, which, by the way, is a revolutionary thing for U.S. presidents. We've been talking about bombing Iran since 1996. We've actually gone ahead and done it. So that's a huge escalatory step, just that alone. He's also bombed Yemen. He's also allowed the bombing of Lebanon through a ceasefire. Israel today is bombing Gaza through their ceasefire on an alleged Hamas attack, which Hamas denies again. Israel can just decide whenever they want to, execute strikes on Gaza, even though there is an observed ceasefire. And then when you look at Ukraine, right, Trump has just raised sanctions or leveled new sanctions against Russia. He is doubling down on the war in Ukraine. And it's just, if you're talking, is he going to do it? Evidence would say yes. His historical record so far in this term alone says yes. Also, when you have somebody like Marco Rubio whispering in his ear constantly, Venezuela is Marco Rubio's grindstone. This is his battle. I don't know what exactly did the ego damage to both of these men where they're obsessed with Venezuela and Maduro, but they want him gone. I think it's very clear the direction that the U.S. is pushing with the deep state basically granting the opposition leader in the country a Nobel Peace Prize. Nobody had ever even heard of this lady, right? And if you just look at the historical record of U.S. relations with Venezuela, we've been trying to overthrow this regime since the 90s. Not this regime, but the unfriendly regimes that sit in Venezuela for the United States. And most recently, I believe it was in Trump's first term in office, he ran very hard with the Juan Guaido opposition leader who was the previous CIA puppet to take over for Maduro if he was ousted. It is. I think that the only thing that's currently saving the situation in Venezuela is how vocal they are being, how vocal the neighbors of Venezuela are also becoming, because, if Venezuela is destabilized, it's going to destabilize the entire region. You're going to have refugees pouring into Colombia, pouring into Brazil, pouring into these neighboring nations. And it's just not what the region needs. You don't want an Iraq to happen in South America if you're a country next to that Iraq, right? So when it comes down to it, I do believe we will see strikes against. I don't think we have the positioning to actually force regime change unless we go into a full declared war with Venezuela. I think that the Venezuelans have done a fairly decent job, Venezuelan intelligence, of ousting and uprooting a lot of the CIA intelligence operations in country. We've seen multiple times before. There was that episode with the Green Berets who were captured down there. They had their little Bay of Pigs moment in Venezuela when they were trying to overthrow the regime the first time with Juan Guaido. So the Venezuelans seem to have a good grasp on the fact that something's coming, which is seemingly different than what the Iranians were pretending like. They were acting like nothing was happening, and then they got struck by Israel, and then 12 days later got struck by the United States. So Venezuela seems to be fully aware of what is potentially coming. They're, like I said, being very vocal, mobilizing in the proper means to hopefully prevent it. But I think that the U.S. is on a war path. I think that we need these regimes changed. We need the control. We need the oil, most importantly, especially if we're doubling down on oil sanctions against Russia. That's just going to tighten the market, right? If you cut out Russia's two largest oil transporting or oil companies, Lukoil and is it Ross something? Those two companies, somebody has to make it up somewhere, right? And the global supply is already tight. Europe is already buying immense amounts of Russian oil from Indian refineries, right? It's not Russian if the Indians refine it. So this is already a situation where Europe is going to take a major hit, right? If these sanctions actually produce the outcome that is intended. I don't think that outcome will actually come to fruition, but we need that regime gone. And I think that the Trump administration and the neocons that are behind this administration think that they can do it. I think that they think that they can do just about anything. They thought that they could regime change Iran. I don't think that's over. I think that is just going to be a much more drawn out regime change process in that part of the region, the country, or the world. But in South America, this Venezuelan regime is isolated. It is alone, and they don't like Maduro. So I think they will go through with it. And I think that action is likely to happen within the next month.
2 days ago, there were reports coming out of Latin America that Venezuelan intelligence captured some more CIA people that were carrying out covert operations. But I also got word that yesterday, 2 or 3 Russian cargo planes landed in Venezuela, delivering some cargo. So I don't know what that is about. But do you see that this is connected to the BRICS? Because we know that Venezuela is selling some of its oil in yuan, Chinese yuan. Also, it is gravitating towards the global south, which is centered around Russia and China, and to a certain degree, Iran. And also, Iran is a strong ally of Venezuela, because America lost in Iran what she was trying to do with the sneak attack, and because she's losing bad in Georgia and in Ukraine, and because China is checkmating her in Asia. Could you believe that this move right here is lashing out at them and trying to weaken them, like take out the weakest link of what is the global south, the rising global south? They're trying to take out the weakest, then go to the next, then the next, and then confront Russia and China.
Yeah, this is written in policy papers, right? This is talking about overextending Russia. That's what Ukraine was. That's what Georgia is. That's what Armenia is. That's what the Baltics will end up becoming. This is no different from the South East Asian region, where we've just seen the revolution in Nepal, where that was a U.S. orchestrated and funded colored revolution in that country. Again, just creating a lot of issues on both India and China's border, because they're both not playing with the United States right now. I would be very hesitant to say that the U.S. has lost. The thing about the U.S. and its position in these conflicts is that it doesn't have to win immediately for it to win eventually. And this is sort of like what we're seeing with Russia and Ukraine, right? Russia didn't have to win immediately for Ukraine to eventually not be in a position to fight anymore, right? The same thing goes for Iran. We saw a 12-day war, right? A 12-day war that exposed a lot of Iran's weaknesses. It exposed a lot of Israel's weaknesses. And the way that the U.S. got out of that was by doing these sort of performative strikes on Iran's nuclear program. If the Iranians were smart, and they were clearly doing this months before, but even if it started at the beginning of the 12-day conflict, they got all of their enriched material out of those places and into different secured locations. They had already moved a number of their enrichment machines and stuff like that for their nuclear program out of those specifically publicized nuclear facilities. So what the U.S. did in this case, we may have destroyed those facilities. It's hard to tell. It's all underground. We don't know what the damage is like underneath, but we haven't resolved the issue, right? We just did that so that the Israelis had an off-ramp and they could pretend like they were victorious in this little exchange. But really what the goal is to slowly attrit the regime. This first 12-day war was just a test, just probing. If the regime collapses as soon as those Israeli strikes start happening, good enough. It's done. We don't have to continue this. But we know, me and you both know, that the U.S. and the Western countries, militaries in general, do not have the endurance for these kind of wars. So at the end of that 12 days, the West needed a break. They did not have the air defense means to keep protecting Israel from these strikes. It was becoming this sort of morose conflict that was just going to continuously get worse for the Israelis on the back end, because the Israelis couldn't do any more to Iran. Iran is different from Syria, right? And then when you're talking about weak links, Syria was the weak link, right? That was the weak link in the axis of resistance. Not that Syria was a part of it, but it was the logistics supply line between Iran and Hezbollah. So you take out Syria, right? That's the first weak link gone. Now the weak link is Hezbollah. Hezbollah has been almost completely destroyed at this point. Israel is striking southern Lebanon at will, and the Hezbollah isn't doing anything in return. So to me, it looks like they are completely damaged and need to either rebuild, which I doubt is going to happen without Iranian assistance, or they're just going to sort of be, they're talking about disarming Hezbollah, and it's going to be a civil conflict. Israel's going to step in and expand their territory into southern Lebanon. I have no doubt about that. And so coming back to Venezuela now, yeah, Venezuela is just the next weakest regime on that list of client states that's not on board with the, international community, if you will, not on board with the Western alliance. And being on the Western hemisphere, they're completely exposed and alone. So it does have to do with BRICS, but I don't think that BRICS is really the idea that the West has when they're talking about destroying this regime. This regime was on the list to be destroyed before before it joined BRICS, before BRICS was even a thing. They were trying to do this. It's just an unfriendly regime, and the empire cannot stand to have that, right? It cannot stand to have a thorn in its side while it's trying to deal with a growing empire across the Pacific, right? It just cannot deal with this. It cannot have this issue in the South. And this goes the same for Canada and Greenland, by the way. You think the talks about annexing these two countries are just random? No, it's part of our national interests, right? We want the trade routes in the Arctic. The Russians have the nuclear icebreakers to control these trade routes. If we annex Canada and Greenland, we have the excuse to expand into the Arctic and control those trade routes. You're going to see the same thing in the South China Sea with the countries like Philippines and Malaysia and all of these different countries. You're going to see a lot of unrest. And the same goes for Venezuela. It is just the next target on the string of target lists, the list of targets that the U.S. is going to go after.
But with all of these wars and all of these covert operations, has anyone sat back and thought about that the United States can't afford this anymore? This is not 40 years ago. This is, this is not 40 years ago when the dollar was without question the world's reserve currency. This is a nation that has trillions upon trillions upon trillions of dollars of debt. Her military is stretched, and I understand she's now caught in a catch-22 because, as Gregory Mannarino said one time, he says the empire needs debt to expand to continue its going, but without the debt, I mean, that comes with a double-barrel shotgun, because as you expand with the debt, you're also putting yourself in quicksand economically even more. So do you think all of this is because she's lashing out in every direction because she doesn't have a strong footing anywhere economically, politically, geopolitically, or militarily?
Yeah, I don't necessarily know if I would describe it as lashing. It's not as if this is a planned direction that the U.S. is taking. It might not always seem like it has the most cohesion, or it might not be the most clear to everybody, but losing in Ukraine is not really losing for the United States. For Ukraine, it is losing. But if you're continuously keeping the Russians bogged down and not able to do things like defend Syria or assist Iran or assist Venezuela, these things are going to have impacts. So again, you're looking at this like a chessboard. Sometimes you sacrifice a bishop to take a queen, right? Mm-hmm. Sometimes you send your rook in to die to get the king into a position to get a checkmate. This is just a classic strategy for any sort of conflict, right? Ever. The U.S. is a powerful monster, and it will continue to, again, it's just not lashing. It's all designed. They are going in this direction. It is aggressive, and it seems like it is lashing out because me and you, at least myself, in my entire life, I've never really seen the U.S. behave like this, where we've always been the police, right? We're always the ones going in to do good, spread democracy, whatever our excuses for waging foreign wars. And this is just, I try to tell people this, we are not in the same world anymore. This is no longer the post-Soviet U.S. empire world. We are now in a shifting power dynamic world where China is on the rise. The U.S. is still the empire, but it is being forced back. And what the U.S. is doing right now is not lashing out. Lashing out comes later. Lashing out comes when the U.S. is really in a bad place and like the economy is bad and we're just trying to save what we have. That's not what we're doing right now. Right now, we're still in the chess game. Right now, we are not running away from their pieces. We are positioning our pieces, losing necessary pieces to then, win the game in the end, but not lashing out yet. We're close. We're getting very close. And when that economic hit comes, and we both know it's coming eventually, we're already way past the dot-com bubble. We're already way past that 2008 housing market crash. We're in uncharted territory when it comes to how bad our economy is. And when that crash does end up happening, that is when you will see the lashing out. So I just really caution people against thinking that, the empire is collapsing, but the empire it has depth to collapse into itself on, right? The Roman Empire didn't just fall in 1 year. It didn't fall in a decade. The Roman Empire had multiple instances of failure, which ended up leading to its eventual collapse, right? And that's what's going on with the US right now. I think that Ukraine was a failure for the US in that the goal was regime change in Russia. Now, it's not over yet. We could see the government in Russia change eventually, but the way it looks right now is that the US has failed. We haven't done what we need to do, and now we're really struggling to get a positive outcome out of Ukraine. But again, when you're dealing with a strategic giant like the United States, the losses don't hit as hard as some of these other losses do for other countries, right? If Russia lost in Ukraine, it's existential for the Russian nation. If the US loses in Ukraine, it's only existential for the Ukrainians, right? Maybe the Europeans in the future, but for right now, just the Ukrainians. So that's the whole idea behind the empire, the monster that we're dealing with. In terms of not being able to afford anything, we weren't able to afford the war in Afghanistan, the war in Iraq, the invasion of Syria. I mean, we can go on and on. We just gave $40 billion to Argentina to bail them out. I mean, how ridiculous is that when we can't fix our own roads? We can't do anything. We're in, what, $38 trillion in debt now? I mean, it's just abysmal. And all we're doing is talking about more wars and more empire. And it is like, you will never see the U.S. come to its senses until it's too late. We just have no off switch. We're just forward, and we're steamrolling off the edge of this cliff.
I was thinking about what you said about how the Roman Empire collapsed upon itself, but it took a while. But if we look back, we can't judge America's fall right now. We have to look back to 1913, 1914. Then we do a measurement of time and say, okay, look, the dollar has lost 99% of its purchasing power. Yeah. When we go to the 1960s, we look at 1960 to 1965, when the United States started robbing its currency of the silver. Then we go to from 65 to 70, and it was robbing the currency of its purchasing power of gold. And then Richard Nixon took the world off the gold and silver standard in 71. And that marked an end not only to American primacy, it's almost like a snake. You cut the head off, the body still contorts for a long while until rigor mortis sets in. So not only was that a fatal blow to the United States empire, it was also a fatal blow to the British Empire, because the sterling pound is tied to the dollar. And so we look at the moments after that. We see the Glass-Steagall Act removed. We see the merger of more corporations and all of this stuff, and the unhinged and bridled greed right in front of us. And now up to today, we see more and more wars. I don't think that we have 20 or 30 or 40 years to go. This started in 1914, and now I think we're on the edges of the end of the American empire, because the debt is astronomical. Yep. One scholar was saying, as a matter of fact, I had KJ Noy on the show a few days ago, and I talked to him, and I was bringing up the $38 trillion debt, and he was like, no, the debt is actually $138 trillion. And then one scholar who worked for the U.S. Budget Office, and he's an economist at one of the high schools of learning or whatever. And back in 2015, he stated that the United States was $222 trillion in debt back then. So how can you kick the can down the road, but eventually the road comes to a dead end?
Yeah. I think that the only explanation of how we're going to save this and salvage this is a war. I think we're going to have a major war, and not just Venezuela. Venezuela will be like a police action. Like, they don't have an air force to really defend against like U.S. airstrikes, and it's going to be overwhelming for Venezuela. But you're right. I mean, when does that can end up becoming too much to kick, right? And that's what we're lining up on. And really the only way we're going to get out of that is by completely disconnecting everybody from the system that we've basically built over the last 60 years. We're going to have to go to war with China in some degree. It has to happen. I don't think it'll be a direct war. It's going to be the exact same thing you see in Ukraine, right? We're going to get the Philippines or Thailand or Cambodia, one of these countries will be willing to fall on their sword for the United States, just like Ukraine was, just like Georgia did. And at the end of the day, does that war work out for us? It does that. If we destroy the entire system that we have built to support ourselves, the globalized system that we utilize to get our rare earth minerals, right, from China, like when that stops, if we don't have the refining capabilities in the United States to, get rare earth minerals, where are you going to get your phone from, right? If we go to war with China, are there even going to be satellites left to make phone calls with? It's part of it, right? But I don't see another way out of the substantial amount of debt we have than to go to war with the people who own that debt.
Yeah, I want to go back to now. We'll go over to the Palestinian conflict, but before, I want to say that Venezuela has a somewhat decent air force. They have Russian.
No, they have a good military and a good air force, but it's just going to be under so much pressure.
Yeah. So now let's transfer our thoughts over to what's going on, as you mentioned earlier, with the Palestinians and what is going on with the bombing, and there's not a word spoken by Trump or his administration on the constant violations of the so-called peace agreement between Hamas and Israel. But now we're seeing Israel bombing Hamas for so-called alleged violations of that treaty. What do you have to say about that?
I mean, this is nothing that there's nothing that I can say that hasn't already been said. I mean, we have been watching this for over a year in southern Lebanon. They have had a ceasefire in southern Lebanon the entire time, and they've continued bombing. There were like 12 assassinations last week in southern Lebanon against Hezbollah fighters. This is just a ongoing thing with the West. We do not really acknowledge ceasefires. We do not acknowledge any of our diplomatic moves unless it personally benefits us to maintain that status quo, right? I said it from the beginning, this ceasefire is a complete joke. You have an openly stated policy that Hamas cannot remain, and then you put forward a non-starter peace plan, which Hamas then accepted, which the Israelis were not expecting that. Mm-hmm. And then now the Israelis are stuck in this position where they're like, well, what are we going to do? Because we have all of these people who don't have homes, right? We've destroyed every goddamn home in Gaza. There's nowhere for these people to go. We were planning on ethnically cleansing and annexing the whole region. And now we have to somehow manage this deal with Hamas. No, it was never going to last. In fact, I said it at the beginning, the only really important agreement that was made and is being followed through upon is the only agreement that the U.S. ever seems to actually hold to any standard, and that's prisoner and body exchanges. We see this in Ukraine and Russia, right? The only thing that can ever be agreed upon is getting their own dead or POWs back. That's exactly what we're seeing in Gaza. The living Israeli hostages have all been returned. There's like 10 dead Israeli bodies that still need to be returned, hostages. But, there's really nothing left to do diplomatically here. The Israelis just need to continue with what they're doing because this is their openly stated goal, right? This is what the far right government wants. This is what most of the Israeli population wants. They have the greater Israel idea ready to go. That's what they're trying to do. That's what annexing Gaza, pushing into southern Lebanon, pushing into Syria is all about. And they're not going to stop until they are stopped. This is something that it has to be understood. The part of why it's not going to stop is because when it does finally resolve itself, Benjamin Netanyahu is facing corruption charges. His court case today was delayed because of the strikes in Gaza. And it's very convenient that whenever he has to go to court, he ends up killing somebody or starting a new war. That's what Iran was. He literally started the 12-day campaign against Iran, probably planned previously, but it delayed his court dates again. So you have this corrupt piece of shit who's trying his absolute best to not go to jail by murdering people, and the U.S. is fully in support of this. So I've said for the entire time, any diplomacy with the United States is just a complete fucking joke right now. We are on a war path. We are in this direction. We have no off switch, and we don't care what happens to even our allies. So you think we're going to care what happens to a stateless people that are underneath one of our allies? No, we couldn't care less. It does really hurt Trump, though. This is going to really, really hurt Trump because he hasn't really resolved anything. There hasn't been really any peace that has come out from a Trump deal, besides maybe India and Pakistan. But I think both sides were kind of looking for off ramps in that and took the deal. But when it comes to Gaza, I would just basically write that entire location off, because there is only one way this ends. The Israelis cannot have a one-state solution because they will be outnumbered by the Arab population. They cannot have a two-state solution because that doesn't align with, first off, the Greater Israel Project, which is Benjamin Netanyahu's goal right now, and it doesn't. It just doesn't work for the Israeli state, right? They don't want that. That's not going to play out for them. The two-state solution has been forever demonized and put down by specifically Benjamin Netanyahu. I mean, the reason why he was funding Hamas and going to Qatar and begging Qatar to continue funding Hamas was because, and these are his words, he wanted to control the height of the flame in Gaza. He wanted to be able to manipulate the opposition in Gaza, which was Hamas. And I personally think October 7th was a manipulation of Hamas for the interests of the Israeli state. And the last 2.5 years have clearly shown that Israel took full advantage and has used October 7th to justify every single despicable act they've committed in the Middle East since that date. I just would not expect anything to change. The whole idea of a ceasefire with the Israelis, first off, is just a complete joke. I mean, they'll kill your diplomatic team in an ally of the nation that feeds them, right? The hand that feeds them, they're willing to bite that to kill whoever they want. So I would write off Gaza personally because the Israelis have already written it off.
And don't forget that Trump was in the Knesset asking the parliament members of the Knesset to pardon Benjamin Netanyahu for his crimes, which is absolutely crazy.
Not for his crimes against humanity, by the way. Not for his war crimes, not for the genocide, the ethnic cleansing, not for any of that. For his corruption crimes inside of Israel. So not only do you have an individual who is stealing and committing fraud inside of Israel against the Israeli state, you also have the man who is committing war crimes and perpetuating wars to prevent himself from going to jail for those corruption charges, or being, ousted of the prime ministership or whatever. Yeah, it's ridiculous.
Now, when we talk about Benjamin Netanyahu doing what he's doing to keep himself from going to jail every time there's a court date coming up, you see a bombing or a false flag operation. Yep. But can't we also say that that's true when pertaining to President Trump? Because look at all of the conflicts and all of the side business that's going on that took all of the headlines off of Jeff Epstein.
Oh yeah,
because he could not pull away from the Epstein thing for the longest, and then the bombing of Iran and all of this other stuff took it off the headline. And even now, if you look at mainstream media, they don't bring it up much, or alternative media doesn't bring it up much. And I think that he is doing the same head fake that Benjamin Netanyahu is doing.
I think the Jeffrey Epstein thing doesn't matter anymore. I think that It matters. Don't get me wrong. Like, I would love to see those Epstein files. I want to know every single person that's on that list. I need to know, but that's not what I mean. The public knows. They know all of the people that are our leadership are disgusting animals who are on that list, right? Everybody knows. Everybody knows Trump's on that list. The only reason people were even talking about the list really was because Trump ran his whole campaign on it. He made it his like fundamental promise to his base. Kash Patel was talking about it. Pam Bondi had that binder with the first stage of the release, right? They created all of the hype around it. It was there, but it was sort of, conspiratorial and sort of on the periphery of most conversation. And then it was thrust into the mainstream, right? And immediately, they were like, "What list? Like, what are we talking about here?" So I think that when we're talking about Epstein, I think that the release of it doesn't really matter anymore. We all know everybody's on it. We all know that it was a honeypot operation for Mossad. Everybody knows what's going on. I don't think the actual content are as important anymore. I would love for it to get released, but I think everybody is kind of under the opinion that it is probably been destroyed already, probably doesn't exist in the way that we want it to. And even if it does, we're never going to see it, just like we're never going to see the JFK files unredacted because of what it entails, right? If that Epstein file is released and those people are criminally charged, it's going to be like 30% of US GDP gone, like company leadership erased, our entire Congress, Senate, and probably the presidential administration gone, right? Like, if you actually are going to criminally charge these people with the crimes that they committed. So it's never going to happen because the elite controls it and they don't want it to come out. You're not going to hear about it anymore because it's not on mainstream media, because probably a lot of the people that own those mainstream media companies are on those lists, right? So it's like it does to me, it doesn't matter anymore. We know, everybody knows the what the playing field is. They understand who is guilty of what for the most part. And you're absolutely right. I think Charlie Kirk was killed the time that the Epstein file, I think it was a Marjorie Taylor Greene, was she the one pushing for it really hard, or I can't remember who it was.
It was Marjorie Taylor.
Yeah, that it got voted down by the Republicans the day Charlie Kirk died. During Charlie Kirk's assassination, it literally happened. And I'm not some conspiracy guy that's saying that they killed Charlie Kirk to get away with it. But it's very convenient, as you say, that every single time we've gone for a vote on the Epstein list or something's come up where it's the topic of discussion, we're going to war with Iran, we're focusing on Yemen, we're unblocking the Red Sea, blah, 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 blah. Oh, Ukraine, we're having a Anchorage meeting that's pointless. And whatever it is, right? Venezuela, you're absolutely right. They will go to extensive lengths to cover that up. And what was your original question? Sorry,
you answered it. You answered it.
Okay, good.
Shout out to Flying Crocodile 46 for the $5 super chat. Thank you. Shout out to, I can't pronounce your name, but thank you for watching us over on Kick. Now let's position ourselves now to the Iranian upcoming conflict and what would Russia and China do about it, because that's their underbelly. We have to understand that if Iran goes, then the United States controls Central Asia, which means that it breaks up the Belt and Road Initiative, the North-South corridor, and then Russia is pinned in all around. China is pinned in. Pakistan is pinned in. India is pinned in. And now the empire lives to see another day and can continue to direct global policy.
I don't necessarily think that's true. I think that if the U.S. goes after Iran and forces a regime change, I don't think that there's any way we can manage that without directly going in. I have said that I think that Iran would be the death of the United States empire, the official nail in the coffin of the empire, because we just don't have the money to do this. We don't have the strategic depth to go through with this. It is going to be domestically incredibly unpopular. I mean, unbelievably unpopular to overthrow another regime in the Middle East and get ourselves stuck there. I do think it would hurt China, but I think what would happen is it would calcify or catalyze the Chinese position, the Russian position, and it would basically, I mean, they are already our enemies, but that would just be the last straw, and then you would have an east-west scenario that would not play out very well for the United States. So I do agree that the U.S. has this idea that going after Iran would be the underbelly of China or Russia, like you said, disrupt oil trade, disrupt global trade, Belt and Road Initiative, all that good stuff. And it makes sense from like on paper. But when we're talking about regime changes in the Middle East, what do we have to go on? Syria lasted a fucking decade, right? Like that was a mess. We're still occupying Syria. People don't even know this. We have U.S. special forces in Syria right now protecting oil. It's so stupid. We also have troops still in Iraq, I'm pretty sure. We're pulling out, kind of, not really, I don't know. And we just got out of Afghanistan. These are all things that happened in 2001 and 2003, right? Like, we just got out of those regime changes. You think Iran is going to be a 2-day walk in the park? You think it's going to be 3 days to Tehran? Like, is that the idea here? Because that's just not reality. We will get trapped in a bear trap of Iran. We will, even if we overthrow the regime successfully, this is the thing about regime changes, is you have to have something there set up afterward. We didn't do it with Iraq. We barely did it with Afghanistan, and both of those didn't work out at the end of the day. And I don't think the Iranian people are going to be too pleased about the U.S. or Israel coming in and doing a bunch of damage to their country. And that's just going to rally around the flag, and then you're probably going to have a massive insurrection issue in the country, which for Israel is fine. That's what they wanted out of Iraq. That's what they wanted out of Syria, because the chaos around them, they can pit all of those smaller players against each other. They can fund one side to fight each other and keep the chaos going. What they don't want is organization. They do not want the Iranian axis of resistance up against Israel. They do not want the Arab nations in a strong position. And so, yeah, I just don't think that the Iranian people are going to go along with that. You're not dealing with Iraq. You're dealing with 90 million Iranians. It's just like, what are you going to do with those people also if you actually successfully regime change? Do you know how many people left Syria? Do you know how many refugees went to Europe from Syria? Where are all those refugees going to go from Iran? Like, that's going to be millions and millions of people exodus from that country into the neighboring regions. You're going to have another ISIS on your hands like that. And then you're going to be spending 3 years fighting ISIS in Iran instead of pivoting to China and actually fighting the war that you're supposed to be fighting, in terms of our policy. So I would agree that it is the underbelly. It is the prime target for the United States. But I think that the battle is just bigger than what we can handle.
Yeah, and I think also what you're saying is true. But if we look at history and we look at policy, doing the same thing over and over again is insanity, right? Yes. And we see them continually doing the same thing over and over again, from Palestine to Syria to Lebanon to Iraq. And I don't think common sense reigns supreme in the mind of a lot of those people. I think they're sociopaths. And I think they get a kick off of trying to demonstrate American power, American hegemony. So I don't think common sense will be a part of their policy, because if it was a part of their policy, they would have never gone into Iraq. They would have never overthrown the Libyan Jamahiriya. They would have never gone and bombed and taken over Somalia or any of them, but they continue to do it. They wouldn't have never parked warships off the coast of Venezuela and tried to dupe the American people and the world again. Said, oh, the fentanyl is coming in through. They've lost the initiative with the war on terror. So now they're coming up with some kind of drug thing. And nobody says, hey, what about the NATO troops that were in Afghanistan guarding poppy fields and shipping the dope from Afghanistan to Haiti, and then from Haiti to the Western world, and the cocaine from Colombia to Haiti, and from Haiti to the Eastern world. Nobody talks about the MI6 and the Israeli intelligence or the U.S. intelligence doing that. So I think that insanity reigns supreme. And when we're dealing with these people, we have to look at it irrational, because they're irrational people. We're rational and saying, well, this shouldn't happen because this, and this will follow. Yep. When has that ever mattered to them?
Never. It has never mattered. And I didn't know if you mentioned it, but I mean, we created those cartels. Mm-hmm. The Contras were, I mean, that was us. That was CIA. So again, I mean, this is just talking. I mean, people are just genuinely uneducated on this because we don't teach it in schools. Because why would we teach why our government is terrible and the awful things they do? But you know, we're just going down there and solving the problems that we created. I mean, it's like, that's like another thing is nobody's even asking. Nobody asks, hey, how does striking narco boats protect American citizens when it's off the coast of Venezuela? Are those 4 outboard motor boats going to make it to like the Florida coast and they're dropping off tons of fentanyl? No, those drugs are going to different locations to then be smuggled into the United States. So, I mean, it's like there's so many questions that you have to be so willing to ignore your own common sense, ignore logic, reasoning, to get to a place where you think that regime change in Venezuela is going to positively affect the narcotic situation in the United States, especially when the narcotics issues in the United States are mostly prescribed. So if you want to deal with the narcotic issues here, you got to go after Big Pharma, and that's not going to happen. So yeah, it's a complete farce. It's a complete hoax. But you know, the American people are stupid enough to buy just about anything. And Trump's key demographic is incredibly willing to just buy whatever that dude says, because he promised no more wars. He's only done more wars. He promised the Epstein files, completely flipped on that, which is just abysmal. What a terrible look. Promised the JFK files, also flipped on that. We're not going to see any of that because all the connections to Israeli intelligence on both of those issues. And yeah, it's just alleged drug boats. I mean, let's just say they are all narcotic drug boats, and the people that are in those boats are the worst human beings you've ever met in your entire lives. That does not give any country the right to extrajudiciously kill these individuals without, I mean, when you have the means of interception, when you have a U.S. aircraft carrier in the region, you have helicopters that can go and intercept these. You can go shoot the guy and then show everybody the drugs he had on his boat, but they're not doing that because they don't want to, because that doesn't help their narrative, right? They need this to be a real threat. They need to manufacture consent against the Maduro regime, right? This is the idea. I hope I answered your question there again. Yeah.
But you know, as you were talking, I was thinking back on how they went into Libya, and first it was terrorism, and then they changed it to Gaddafi was giving soldiers Viagra and dope to fight and kill, and then they started talking about Iran was shipping dope to Venezuela. And I remember this very specifically. The Mexican government was thinking about backing their currency, the peso, with the large silver reserves. And then Mr. That has never met a war that he didn't like, Lindsey Graham, threatened to go to war with Mexico, and then the drive for Mexican drug cartel started amplifying, and we're seeing that. Remember when they got mad with China is responsible for the fentanyl. It's everything, and it's a constant stream of propaganda. And as you said, the American people have been dumbed down to such a degree that they allow these things to continue to be systematically put in their head without question. And one thing I wanted to say about this, I wanted to go back to something before you comment. Do you remember that the Epstein files were splitting Trump's base. And when the war took place, the base unified because nothing else, he was alienating people, said, well, if you believe that, then I don't need you to be my supporter. And all of a sudden the war started popping up and no one talks about the Epstein files. And now he's solidifying his base again. So you don't think all of this is planned?
I think that it's planned in the way that listen, I think that there is a general direction, a general idea that the U.S. is going to go in, right? There are certain geostrategic realities that the U.S. has to adhere to if it wants to maintain its hegemony. The path by which we are going is extremely self-destructive and really is quite incompetent in maintaining that hegemony. So I think that there is plans. I think that they have routes and options that they like to take. But I also think you're dealing with a bunch of greedy, selfish, amoral individuals who could not give a shit about what happens to America. I mean, most of them are 60, 70, 80. They're all about to die. They're all making killings off of the stock market right now. They're all insider trading. So at the end of the day, I mean, it's planned, but it's also improvised, right? And when something doesn't go the right way, like Ukraine didn't go the right way, removing Russia from SWIFT didn't go the right way. Now what you're seeing is the improv. Now what you're seeing is the trying to make up for all of the failure and trying to make it work because we have the strategic depth to course correct, right? On these smaller geostrategic interests of ours. And so, yes, it is planned, but I don't think that Trump is looking at this and going, okay, my base is divided. I need to start a war now. I think he's going, okay, I really want to avoid this negative press. I'm going to hype up this event over here, which was already going to happen, right? We already planned on going to war with Iran. We already planned on hitting Iran's nuclear facilities, blah, 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 blah. Now I can just use the theatrics of this, the theater, really play it up and get my base not talking about this terrible thing that is really negatively impacting me. Now they're going to talk about my peace deals, the war being fought. It's just distractions. And yeah, you're absolutely right. It's like I said, it's planned, but it's also planned, right? Mm-hmm. There is a plan to start with, but no plan survives first contact. And that's when you see the improvising. And I personally think that the US is terrible at improvising. What we like to do is cause chaos and then benefit off of that chaos while everybody's recovering. And when we can't ensue that kind of chaos, like against Russia, like against China, we can't force that chaos onto those countries because they're too big, they're too powerful. We don't have the means to do it. We want to. We tried with Russia, right? We're allowing the Ukrainians to strike whatever they want inside of Russia. That's been the case for some time. I don't know. People were talking like 2 weeks ago when there was a Storm Shadow strike inside of Russia. Oh, the U.S. gave them permission. They struck targets inside of Russia when they were in the Kursk region. So I don't know what people are talking about. This is nothing new, but this is another way to cause chaos, right? You're trying to destabilize the Russian energy sector, which is going to have tremendous cascading effects on the global energy sector, which, by the way, the U.S. is very much involved in. So if that negatively impacts the U.S., I mean, their plan doesn't really work out, but we don't have any other options, right? So the improvising, that's what I'm talking about. It's part of the plan, but it might not actually help us reach the end goal or objective.
So now with the little time we have left, Scott, give us the full rundown on what's going on.
Yeah, can I share my map with you?
Yeah.
Let me send that over your way. I just updated it, but I can give you guys some of the aspects of what is going on in Ukraine right now. So this is the front line. This is my map, calibrated map. You guys can find that link in my Telegram, on my Twitter, and on my YouTube. But most importantly right now is the battle for Pokrovsk. This is the major city that is being fought over currently by the Russians and Ukrainians. This is where the Ukrainians have their primary focus. So the Ukrainians have the most amount of units in this area. And what we're looking at here is an encirclement. You can see that the gap for the Ukrainians to enter the city is less than 3 miles, which is basically rifle range from either side. There's drones that cover this entire area. So the Battle of Pokrovsk is coming to an end. It has been a really miserable battle for the Ukrainians. Like I said, they are encircled here, but this is just the focal point. You guys might have been hearing a lot about this area up here. If you follow the war closely, this is where the Ukrainians are currently counterattacking. And if you were to believe the Ukrainian information space right now, this is where the entire war is happening. There's nothing else happening anywhere else because this is the only place where anything is even remotely going good for Ukraine. Now let's zoom out and look at some other areas where, it's not Pokrovsk, which is the main focus, where the Russians are advancing incredibly quickly. So over here in the Dnepropetrovsk region, Russian forces have advanced tremendously into the Zaporozhye Dnepropetrovsk region over here, threatening the village of Holyai-Polye. So massive advances down here. Moving up, we can see that the city of Konstantinivka has also been penetrated by the Russians. This is not supposed to happen. The Russians are very quickly moving through this area into the city of Konstantinivka. Very bad for the Ukrainians, who are already dealing with other fires and also trying to manage a massive manpower shortage. Moving up here to Seversk, Russian forces are now directly on the outside of the city. I expect that the Battle of Seversk will begin here shortly. Coming up here to Liman. Liman is an area, if you guys remember, that was recaptured by the Ukrainians during the 2022 counteroffensive. This was one of the major achievements of the 2022 counteroffensive. The Russians have now re-entered Liman. The third battle of Liman is now underway, and this is very important because it directly leads to the Slavyansk-Kramatorsk conglomeration, which is the final line of defense for the Ukrainians in the east, after which there is basically nothing until the Dnipro River. And then finally, moving up here to Kupiansk, we see that yet another Russian city is currently experiencing an encirclement on this side of the Oskil River, which is the dividing line here. Logistics is very hard for the Ukrainians into this region. And in Kupiansk, they are getting mauled by the Russians. In fact, the entire Kharkov region is now looking incredibly weak. And what my sources are telling me is that there will likely be a large offensive with an entirely new grouping of Russian military. So they're going to have a little different sign. I don't know if you guys remember at the beginning of the war, there was like ZV. We saw some other ones later on. There is a new grouping that will have a new symbol, and it looks like they are going to try to push in the Kharkov direction. So that will be very interesting to see in the near future. Just overall, across the battlefield, the Ukrainians are incredibly weak. They are losing hundreds of square kilometers of territory per week at this point, which is... if you look at like the monthly gain of Russian advances, it is what the Russians did in the entirety of 2023. So this is incredibly important. It's snowballing out of control. And we are now reaching the precipice of a full Ukrainian collapse. They just can't manage any parts of their front. And when I talk about Pokrovsk, I talk about how it's a main focus. Ukrainian special forces units have just actually been moved into this region to try to help. You're not supposed to use special forces in this sort of environment. They just will get killed like normal infantry. So a lot of very, very bad things unraveling, and there's no real options moving forward for the Ukrainians. They're dealing with this extreme manpower issue, and they still have not decided to mobilize 18 to 25-year-olds. I do expect this eventually, but it's already too late. They've already lost key defensive positions such as Pokrovsk. Like I said, if you look at what is behind Pokrovsk, there's nothing. There's no village. There's like little villages, but they're all these little farm villages. You can see that there's almost nothing to these. There's no infrastructure, no defense lines out here. The east, it was very important for the Ukrainians because of all of the cities, all of the defenses that they had built up. And now that is no longer there for them. So not only are they experiencing a severe lack of Ukrainian manpower, but they're also in much worse positions. Tactically, the environment is a nightmare for the Ukrainians. And the Russian army is just getting stronger and stronger every day. In the city of Pokrovsk just last week, there was a single day where 178 glide bombs fell on the city. That's not good for the Ukrainians in those locations. They have no defense against that. Russian drones are now operating 30 to 40 kilometers behind the front line, disrupting logistics of the Ukrainians everywhere. This winter is going to be very dynamic. This winter is going to be decisive for this conflict. And I think you are going to see multiple Ukrainian cities fall over the next 6 months.
Well, Scott, for the people who don't know, is that flat land or is that hilly land that Russia is advancing across?
Yeah, so just in general, all of Ukraine is flat land. Like there's a small mountain range over here in the Transcarpathian region near Romania, but this is nowhere near where any of the fighting is. Ukraine is basically Kansas. For those of you, for our American listeners, it is flat. It is a breadbasket, right? All of this is farmland. You can see all of this is farmland. It's all flat. It's all barely above sea level. It's just all farmlands. And that's why Ukraine is a breadbasket. And it's why it's important to the globe, because of the amount of food that it produces and the amount of minerals that it has located in its eastern regions. And it's why this part of the country here that the Russians control is so valuable, because this is where all of Ukraine's GDP basically lies.
So as they approach the Dnieper, what does that bode? How does that bode for Kiev, the capital?
Okay, so yeah, as they approach the river, well, okay, so there's a couple things here. The choices that the Ukrainian army has made in fighting in the east, basically making this their castle, Slavyansk and Kramatorsk. This is the castle, and then this is the kingdom for the Ukrainians, if that makes sense. They don't have any desire to defend back over here because there's nothing to defend. There's no cities. You can see Pulverhad is just like completely isolated. It's not even that big, but there's just nothing but farmland for about, what is this, 100 miles here? Or 70 miles? There's nothing but farmland. So the Ukrainians have no desire to defend this. And I believe, and this has been my personal opinion, that you will never see battles for cities like Zaporozhye, Pavlograd, Dnipropetrovsk, probably not even Kharkiv, because the Russian modus operandi for this war is attrition, right? And so the Ukrainians are fighting in the east, which is easier for the Russians. They have to bring all of their manpower, all of their equipment across the country to the east, where the Russians are then destroying it in place, right? And then what we're now seeing is the effects of that attrition, right? When in 2023, when the attrition was in its greatest point, when the Ukrainian army was the strongest, we saw the battle for Bakhmut, right? Bakhmut lasted 6 to 9 months. It was a very bloody battle. The entire city was encircled by the Russians. The Ukrainians were feeding troops through this one little tunnel. Now we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 Bakhmuts all happening at the same time, right? So this just goes to show you the snowball effect that I talked about, right? The attrition is taking hold. The Ukrainians do not have the means to defend the entire map against from the Russian advances. So the Russians are now just the attrition is speeding up. The snowball is gaining mass. It's heading downhill, and it's getting faster. It's getting faster. When that attrition finally gets to a point where the Ukrainian army loses most of its organization, then you are going to see the Russians explode out of the east. The Ukrainian army will have to retreat to the Dnieper River because there will not be another place to rest. And at that point, I think you will see the regime in Kiev run away, basically, because there will not be a defined front line. There will not be a means to defend Kiev at that point. And I don't think the regime is actually going to stay in place and be, overthrown in that sort of violent way, like something like Libya or something like that. I think you're going to see them go into exile. They're going to be a government in exile in Poland or something, talking about how they need to get Ukraine back, blah, 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 blah. But I've always said that there is a very real possibility that Odessa, Nikolaev, Zaporozhye, Dnipropetrovsk, Poltava, these cities, Kharkiv, will be Russian eventually. I think you will see the Russians on this side of the river and basically down to these oblasts, much like Novorossiya. But I have said this the entire time, and I maintain this. You will never see battles for the cities of Odessa, Nikolaev, Kryvyi Dnipropetrovsk, Kremenchuk, Poltava. Maybe Kharkiv, you might see a battle for the city because that could actually happen. It's a little bit closer to the front. But these places will be taken diplomatically. These places will be handed over to the Russians, or the Russians will simply walk in because there is no organized resistance to the Russians at that point. So the battle in the East is the end-all battle. That's what I want your audience to understand. After the East, there will not be a Ukrainian army left to defend the expanses of farmland that the Russians will eventually push into.
Shout out to M Sparks for the $2 super chat. But so, what about the reports of French troops and NATO troops being deployed to Odessa in the western part of the country? Do you think Russia will allow that?
No, and I don't think that any European troops will be sent. Okay, so there's two ways of looking at this. If you're looking at it in any sort of rational and reasonable position, there is absolutely no way that Europe sends troops into Ukraine without a ceasefire being in place. It's far too risky. It will never play domestically. It's just a horrific idea. Now, if Europe is staring down the barrel of a gun and they have no options and their only option is potentially to get into a war, then I mean, all bets are off. You might see whole divisions of European troops moving into Ukraine, but I don't think the Russians will allow it. I think those troops will be struck by Russian munitions, especially if the war is ongoing. And this is a whole idea that the Russians have openly discussed. They've said, we cannot allow European troops into Ukraine for the very specific reason that they will prevent the Russians from fighting, right? They will act as a tripwire force. So this is already a red line. This is already a no-go. And, they can talk about it all they want, but Europe doesn't really have the means to send troops into Ukraine besides in this very advisory role. And if they want to act as a tripwire, the Russians will never allow them into the country. And my personal opinion on it is that the Europeans could not give a rat's ass about Ukraine. They don't care. They don't want Ukraine to be a welfare state. They don't really want a ceasefire. That's why they're always arguing against it. Because what happens when the war ends? Who's going to be responsible for reconstruction? Do you think the Russians are going to pay for European or Ukrainian reconstruction? No. Who's going to pay your Ukrainian pensions? Who's going to pay their checks in the military? Who's paying them right now? You think Europe wants another welfare state like Greece in their union? No, that doesn't work for them. Ukraine is a battering ram. Ukraine is a tool. It is meant to fall on the sword. And that is exactly what they're doing. And that's what they're going to continue to do until this reaches its military conclusion.
And that's what before we go, and that's one of the things that I was saying, that once they use up all of Ukraine's utility, I mean, all of the coal mines, the farmland, the resource-rich areas, then the rest of Ukraine is pretty much useless. So why would the U.S. and the EU continue to support Ukraine? Because it will drain their coffers. They're already suffering economic collapse and across Europe and the United States. So why would anyone think that the US and the UK and the EU would continue to support Ukraine after all of its minerals are now on Russia's side, farmland is on Russia's side, Black Earth is on Russia's side, the coal mines are on Russia's side? Why do you think that they will continue to take care of them?
Yeah, I don't think they would, right? If there is a peace, if there's no longer a war, if you're not able to use this politically to your advantage, there is no reason. And I mean, just when you look at the US's position or Europe's position, would you rather have peace in Ukraine, or would you rather have a Russian boogeyman who at any minute could penetrate into NATO territory and anything, right? That's the ooh spooky. Hitler is coming, right? He at all times he's both losing in Ukraine and about to walk into Berlin. So I think it's for the West, it's a good thing, right? I want Putin to be that Hitler-esque figure. I want to be able to convince my population that I need to spend unbelievable amounts of money on stupid shit that doesn't benefit them, like missiles and artillery shells and all of this, and sending that to Ukraine because of the spooky Russians over there. They're gonna get us, right? That's what we want. That's what the Soviet Union was. That's why we didn't allow Russia to join NATO, is because we just need a boogeyman. NATO doesn't have any reason to exist without Russia. Right? There's no reason for it to be there. So at the end of the day, if we're making money off the thing, right? If Europe doesn't want it to end because they don't want to deal with the welfare state of Ukraine after the war, and if we're still benefiting by the spooky Russian narrative, why change? Why fix something that ain't broken? Which is sad because it just means the basically slaughter of Ukrainians. But
yeah. Man, once again, Scott, man, you hit it out the park, man. I really appreciate you joining me on the platform again.
Yeah, thank you for having me on, brother. It's always a pleasure. Good conversation.
Yes, sir. And I'll send you the video. Be blessed and be safe.
You too, brother. Be safe.
All right, everybody listen. Also, as we talk about the situation geopolitically, always remember this. When we're dealing with each other, let's deal with each other in a respectful manner. Even if we don't agree, let's be agreeable to disagree. There's no need for name calling. There's no need for any of that stuff, okay? We are an adult. We are adults. So let's treat each other like one. Let's not be petty like the people in power, okay? Because you see what happens with the people in power. They're losing their position. So I want to say to you all this. Do right by others, not because there's some material gain or some accolades to be had behind it. Do right to others because it's the right, the humane, and the godly thing to do. Because even when no one else is watching you, remember that God Almighty is watching you. As my late mother would always say, God sits high, but he looks low. Know that I love you more than life if you love truth, but know that the love that I have for you will always pale in comparison to the love that God has for you. Until we next speak again, stay strong, stay true. But above all things, remember to stay righteous. Hey, mama, your baby boy loves you more than life. Thank you, everybody. Deuces, we're out of here. Peace.
Told you to walk away. That was my first and last mistake. I'm blue without your face. But what can I do? 'Cause I'm just a sinking ship, and you're just a